Good morning and welcome to the Week 2 tournament review. It's myself, Mike Leone, with Drew Dinkmeyer. I'm where, I feel like I need to be right now. I just need a day off and to be on the beach. So I'm trying to channel that energy, Drew.
I appreciate it. It's very calming on this Monday morning after a hectic Sunday afternoon if you're trying to swap teams feverishly.
Yeah, so for me, my experience, Drew, I know you went to the Jets game, so that wasn't a fun experience for you.
No.
But it was also not a fun experience for me. I ended up taking more early guys than I initially planned to, and I really wish I hadn't, just the way it turned out.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to take one contrarian running back, and I ended up getting a little overzealous, and I took two contrarian running backs, and it was tough slate because none of them hit early, but you were still okay for hour one, you were okay. Hour two, you were okay. And then all of a sudden, Najee catches a swing pass on third and long and takes it in for a touchdown. And then Cooper Kupp goes from really good to the stone nuts. And it turned in a hurry. It made the swap decisions really easy. And we'll go over that. Actually ended up with the tilt space teams I did with Overset and Holka. We almost, on miracle swaps, we were 3 Derrick Henry yards away from cashing all 3 of our juke teams, and we were pretty live to win. A subscriber actually won the juke. I'm not sure if he late swapped, but he had the Henry stack. So, but yeah, it was kind of crazy. It was another week, in some ways, like week 1, where I was happy to survive with some cashes, but at the same time, it was the one that stings, I guess, is because I didn't leave as many spots open as I initially planned to. I couldn't really get onto the Henry stuff as much as I kind of planned. We had talked about it on Established Amelia, how he was going to be way too low. Obviously, no one knew he was going to score 50 DraftKings points, but another reminder that crazy shit happens, and you can kind of play accordingly.
Yeah, I think the slate set up pretty well. I think those are my favorite slates to play. Unfortunately, I just wasn't in the best position to try to play firing late swaps on my phone while in a suite having conversations with people. So things got a little bit hectic for me in terms of what I wanted to do. I basically was trying to have one early contrarian wide receiver or tight end and one early contrarian running back per team, or maybe a defense, 2 pieces per team is kind of what I was looking for. And so I full faded Najee, I full faded Kupp. I played one Higbee team, which in retrospect, I feel actually good about. His ownership was actually lower than I anticipated. Going in, if it had been what I thought it was going to be, maybe I wouldn't have. And my idea was I wanted to have a decent bit of Darrell Henderson, which that was going very well. And then he got hurt. And I wanted to have pieces of Denver. And so I had some Javonte Williams, I had a Hamler piece, and I had a Cortland Sutton piece. And the Sutton piece was great. And so if I had that, and then I had some Nick Chubb, I had a little bit of Cleveland as well that I was looking to attack. And so I think I started off the day well. I was not in an optimal position to swap just because of the nature of things. And I played a lot lighter yesterday as a result because I kind of knew that would be the case. But I think it did provide me kind of clear indication of where to go. And like you said, Najee gets there late in a way that ends up being one of the top running back scores on the slate because it was kind of a lower running back score overall. And then Cooper Kupp just blows people out of the water. So it's very clear, you need to get different and quickly. And if you got different and quickly, you got paid off in a good way because, Dallas and the Chargers game really struggled. Both defenses played better than expected. The production was also a little bit more concentrated on the Charger side with Eckler and Mike Williams as opposed to Keenan. And then Amari really struggled. And so you had all these failures to get away from. And then, all the other stacks in the late games pretty much hit. The problem is if you swap to AJ Brown and DK Metcalf in the Tennessee-Seattle game as the pieces you wanted to get to, that didn't work. And so it gave you a lot of opportunities, whether it was Kyler stacks, whether it was Brady stacks, whether it was Russ and Lockett stacks with Henry. There were a lot of opportunities to recoup value on the slate. And that's really what we were trying to stress the whole week And some of those teams turned into winning lineups because the scores were lower from their first games anyway. But some of those teams just min cashed and kind of salvaged days. And that's ultimately like when a slate sets up that way, that's why there's so many advantages to playing it the way that we were trying to articulate playing it.
Yeah, and not just, chances to save yourselves, but chances to actually win some of these small field tournaments. I'll show you a swap gone wrong. This was my team in the Thunderdome that came almost in last place. Started with Kamara, Terrace Marshall, which was just like kind of a coffin to begin with.
Yeah.
Also, like these small field ownerships get a little volatile. Higbee came in at 5% and Cup came in at 10%. And I played Darrell Henderson for leverage at 30%. So that stunk. You can see, we'll talk about the Million Maker more in a little bit. You can see Cup was very chalky. I mean, 20% was one of the highest owned players in the Million Maker. So,
and Henderson was 6.
Yeah. So we were right there, but small field, you got to think a little bit more about where the ownership's going to go. I was wrong there, but I swapped to Metcalf, Tannehill, AJ Brown, kind of like what you talked about. Swaim, emergency swap, Chargers D, hoping that game went wrong. Horrendous. In the juke, though, we had this. This was the most amazing stretch. If you didn't watch it,
that's outrageous.
We got immediately a KJ Osborne touchdown.
That's
and
outrageous.
then immediately a Gronk touchdown. So this team was very, very live for a while.
Yeah.
I actually thought we were going to win at one point. And then Kyler, he scored 38 points. You can't complain. But him and DeAndre Hopkins died. They didn't score the fourth quarter. Atlanta, just like they did against Philly, we couldn't get any garbage time stats from Atlanta. Yeah. They actually made it a game. Got to 28-25, but then. So we did get like a Ridley touchdown in there in the second half, but like the actual fourth quarter went awry. Had we played the Vikings D, we couldn't bring ourselves to play the Vikings D against our own double stack. Had we done that, we would have actually came in second. We would have lost in heartbreaking fashion. As subscriber here, CJ Ekobin, whose name I said a little bit better than when I called him Kakobin on the Tilt Space show. He tweeted me after because we were kind of tilting that we lost, but you can see, man, like you could with these small field tournaments just survive it when you get something like Derrick Henry, who honestly even came in higher owned than I thought at 7%, but we also
some of that stuff in smaller field high stakes also, like the thing you also have to understand about late swap in general is that the smaller the field, the more it's going to have an impact in moving kind of ownership around in terms of where things finally land. And also the more likely on the higher stake side, people are actually going to use it. In the Millie Maker, when you have 265,000 entries or whatever like that, most of those entries are not going to use it. And so the ownerships get a little bit stagnant there. And so, Derrick Henry comes in a little bit higher than you probably would have expected here, but my guess is he might have started at 3 and ended at 6. You know what I mean? Just because of the way people were kind of moving things around. And so you do have to be thoughtful about the type of contest that you're playing in, who your opponents are, how equipped they are to take advantage of information. And this is where it gets into a game of leveling in terms of trying to figure things out. But generally, if a player starts really, really low, it's going to be hard for them to get high. They might get to like medium if things go really crazy in terms of people swapping around, but usually they'll go from really, really low to just low. And that's kind of what happened with Derrick Henry.
Yeah. And then we had another swap where, we were $100 off being able to play Mike Evans over Antonio Brown. So we had another team that got kind of live. I do think one thing to keep in mind, what we did on this team, two things we did here. One, we really thought we needed to hit the nuts. So we didn't go like with a huge stack. We took Julio Lockett, single correlation, Brady, wide receiver, Pitts coming back, trying to hit like 4 skill players that really go nuts. And then also,
is this where I tell you could have gone Gronk Evans?
No, we don't want to hear about that. We could have gone Gronk Evans. We wanted to hit the pure nuts. No, this is not where you tell me that. Just go away. The other thing too, I think, and I screwed up on a FanDuel team where I had a lot of cap relief left over, where I was like, I should play Lockett over Metcalf, and I should play Julio or AJ Brown just because I'm in trouble. I know they're going to be lower owned, but I couldn't leave the cap on the table. It was a little easier to do it on DraftKings because the cap, like this team wouldn't have fit with either of those players. But they come in at like 6%, whereas AJ Brown and Metcalf, they were definitely, I'm trying to see if we can find a team. They were definitely owned at a higher rate than that.
I thought I saw Metcalf around 15.
Yeah.
Just keep going lower. You'll probably find.
We don't need to find one. But Najee, Stone Chalk comes in.
Look at that Awesome team. Big Ben, Najee, Claypool, and Deontay Johnson.
Man, Mike Tomlin getting Deontay Johnson hurt on a meaningless play. That was tough.
That is an old school Steelers approach. That's back to the Lev Bell, Antonio Brown days where you just jam four Steelers.
Here's an AJ Brown, so he was double Julio.
Yeah. Look at some of those ownerships. CeeDee Lamb, Cooper, and Keenan Allen were all between 20 and 30%, with Lamb and Allen at 30%. And so it's easy to see how, when you just get so much leverage on the field when you get away from that, whether you're off to a good start or a bad start. When players get up around 30+%, there's just so much more working in your favor, especially in football, a really volatile sport. Injuries happen and whatnot. There's so much more working in your favor by fading those players than by playing them.
Okay, so looking at the Millie Maker, the winner, and this was mind-boggling, Gronkowski comes in at 18% owned in the Millie Maker, and compared to 12% for Tyler Higbee. So the field won that one.
That's a flashback to like 2014 DFS, where the box score from the previous week matters more than the projection for the upcoming week. And maybe it's a Gronk thing because he's a super popular player. Maybe it's because the production came in prime time before, and it's certainly still part of a stack that people like. Brady Gronk is a stack that's been working for a decade. So maybe those are factors. But generally what we've seen in terms of how the field utilizes players the last few years, projection has mattered way more than game log and box score of late, as people have shifted to using optimizers, using more research tools than simply kind of what they remember happening last. But this week with Gronk, he was the exception to that rule, because he did not project as well as some of these guys like Higbee and Font and whatnot, but carried more ownership than Higbee and similar ownership to Font.
Yeah, and this is where, if you're playing a super large field tournaments, it can be discouraging at times, because you see the Brady, double stack with Leonard Fournette in there, Leonard Fournette and Gronk, no wide receiver, no bring back, and
We'll throw this one up on the screen, producer Mike.
Oh yes, thank you. And then the one-offs on. Like you had the Lockett Henry correlation, which was great, but then the one-offs on Rondell, Marvin, and that's where we talk about sometimes it's hard. These large, you just have to hit the nuts, right? Not correlated to anything, just 3 wide receivers that did super well. I did want to bring up, so our final GPP game scores for the week, which, as you can see, like you definitely had. It was the 4 afternoon game. So if you knew you had to get off Chargers And all 3 games hit.
You had options.
Like, did you pick the right players?
Yeah.
Henry Lockett was the stone nuts, and Mike Evans with Pitts was okay. Ridley was good. Obviously, Gronk went off in this game. Arizona,
even Mike Davis was fine. Like Atlanta, like you probably were okay. Whoever you picked as a bring back, they probably weren't winning really large field stuff, but you were probably okay because none of their main guys like really bombed.
Yeah, and then Arizona, Minnesota. It's also a good example too. Like sometimes if you're in trouble late and you got to squeeze in the upside, like taking those cheap correlated pieces, just the way it turned out, of course. But AJ Green, Rondell Moore, Osborne all hit. You could have hit that with some firepower for other. And if you look at the actual results, Adam Roush, who's helped us put together that game scores, the idea originated with him, also put this together, kind of looking at the final average ownership against the DraftKings scoring for the top 8 players, top 8 projected players in each game, and you can see the cluster there, like that. Those were the games, those were the pivot games, and they all were okay ownership wise, and they all scored really well. And then you can see this game, it was
Yep.
very high owned and disappointing. It was still rated well for us from a game score perspective because we thought the ceiling was so high going in, but things happen, man. You know, he got a 20-17 game. Like, it seems crazy. We didn't think that would happen, but Dallas changed the way they played. It was tough to tell, and the teams just weren't efficient too much.
Yeah.
All right, Drew. Anything else you? Oh, I'll just hit on a couple notes from the Millie Maker. I'll bring that back up. But the ownership breakdown, which I think is interesting. Ryan Queenan, who does some back-end data stuff for us, said every team in the top 100 had a cumulative ownership under, our recommended 125%. Most of those teams were under 100%. And that's even with like the high owned cup. I have noticed, I felt like the ownership percentages have been really spread out in the Million Maker early. We didn't get too many guys above 20%. Cup around 20% was about the highest. But the that's just kind of how it went. You definitely want to be cognizant of not putting too much chalk together. And this winning team, say what you will about the correlation, maybe the individual plays, but he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players if you count the defense at single digit ownership.
And the highest of any players yesterday in the Millie Maker was Keenan Allen at 24%, then Najee Harris at 21%, CeeDee Lamb 20.7, Cooper Kupp 20.3, 20.4, and then Jamar Chase 18.4, Gronk 17.8, Fant 17.5. So it was basically like that 15 to 25% mark was like the high owned players, the highly utilized players from the field. So if you're thinking about that in terms of like ways to differentiate, we haven't seen the chalk really condense heavily on like a few players, but there's still that upper tier of players that you're wanting to try to find ways to differentiate from. The big thing for me this week, which I talked about last week, we talked about on Established Million, talked about in my quick hit on what we're looking forward to for week 2. It was back to bringbacks. Bringbacks worked. And double stacks and bringbacks were like a good approach generally on this slate. And so I think that you're still going to want to correlate your pieces. Now, there were so many game environments that went off that you could build a lineup of individual pieces hitting from all these different places like the Millie Maker winner did. And that can end up being the highest scoring game. But in terms of like narrowing your decisions down, the number of decisions you need to get right, I still think the double stack with the bringback, especially on DraftKings, is the way to kind of play these GPPs. I still think the field is probably doing it less than they should.
Yeah, and you can see we're hoping to improve the accuracy as the season goes on, but you can see in the Millie Maker here our ownership projections to the actual and the error. We were pretty good on most players. Obviously, the Higbee Gronk stuff definitely took us by surprise. So those two errors are pretty correlated there. And then we did see the field do, a couple guys like Eli Mitchell, kind of like that old school. Those guys are being played a little bit more by the field, like you were mentioning, Drew. So we'll continue to work on that as the year goes on. But yeah, I think that'll do it for us. This week, I'm looking forward to week 3. Feel like, I don't know, it's been a weird start where I feel like I've been close and very far away all at the same time through 2 weeks. So it's been an odd start to the year, is a good way to put it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will see you on Establish the Million Saturday mornings to prep you for week 3.